the challenge for most of our marriages is that we're selfish people married to selfish people.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am so excited that you are with me today, and my guest that is back with me. You guys heard him back in November talking about his Christmas book. We are back this week talking about marriage, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about. This is part of the Schoolhouse Rocked family series, and so over the next several weeks, as you know, we're talking about all things family, and this is probably one of, if not the most important part of family marriage, because it's the thing that kind of heads up the family, right? I mean, you have to have marriage to have kids, and you have to have a good, strong marriage in order to have a good, strong family. And so I have Bob Lepine back with me this week, and I am going to say, he might not say this, but I'm going to say he's an expert on marriage, and we'll talk about why. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. No parent should homeschool alone. You have a God-given calling to bring up your child to love God and to steward his creation. And BJU Press exists to help you be successful in that endeavor. Visit their website at bjupresshomeschool.com or call 1-800-845-5731 to connect with an experienced homeschool consultant. Well, Bob, welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am so glad that you've taken time to come back with me again today. I loved our last conversation, and I'm really looking forward to just some encouragement this week for myself and for those of us listening. So introduce yourself to us and who you are once again.
Let me just say, first of all, I know I'm late to the party with this, but congratulations on crossing the 500 episode threshold back a few months ago. Way to go on that. And yeah, it's a privilege to be back with you here. And I have listeners who will know me will probably know me from 28 years of working with FamilyLife Today. I was the co-host of that radio program with Dennis Rainey and then with Dave and Ann Wilson for almost 3 decades. In addition to that, I pastor a church in Little Rock, Arkansas, Redeemer Community Church. I've written some books. I've spoken various places. So that's probably, that's the guts of my bio there.
Well, I mentioned this the last time you were on and said that years ago, probably about 24, 25 years ago, I used to listen to you and Dennis Rainey on my way to work every morning. And that was before we had kids. And that really, it was such an encouragement to me because you would talk about parenting, and I was still fairly, newly married. And, it was a lot of stuff that he didn't learn growing up. And so I just would just sit at your feet and just learn from you, from your guests, from just such a powerful radio program. And I'm so grateful for that. And so when we were talking about this series and talking about marriage, and I thought, oh, I really want to have Bob Lepine back on to talk about this and just to bring some encouragement, because I know that, like you said, you spent, more than 25 years sitting in front of a microphone talking to people about marriage and bringing that encouragement to them as well. And so I want to start by you telling us, I always love to hear people's stories of how they met their wives, how they, came to be a couple, how they got married. If you have a good proposal story in there, that's always a bonus. If it was lame, maybe just leave that part out. But tell me about you and your wife, Marianne, and how the Lord brought the two of you together.
We were both students at the University of Tulsa, and both were involved as volunteer leaders with an outreach organization called Young Life. And so we met through our mutual work with Young Life. We were at a retreat, a leadership retreat together one weekend, and I was in line getting food on a Friday night, and there was somebody else I just met who was in front of me. She was I think a junior or a senior. I was still a freshman. And so she was talking to me and she said, "So what year are you?" And I said, "I'm a freshman." And she went, "Oh, you're a freshman? I thought you were like a junior or a senior." And of course, I loved hearing that, right? I was, oh, well, that's nice. And Marianne, who was behind me in line, said, You're a freshman, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, what did you think I was?" Seeing if she was gonna, she said, maybe a sophomore. And I thought, okay, all right, a little spunkiness here, and that was our first conversation. We wound up going to Target on a date. That was our first date. I needed to run to Target. I said, you want to go with me? We went out on a Friday night to Target, and then we dated for over 4 years, which would not be my recommendation to young couples today, but it's while we were in college, we dated. She graduated with a degree in nursing. I graduated a year later with my degree in broadcasting, and we were married in 1979. And I'll let you decide whether this is a lame engagement story or not. So I had gone and bought a box. This was right before Christmas, 4 pieces of chocolate candy in it. And I was able to select which kind of chocolates I wanted. And I picked 2 of them because they were the biggest ones, because I knew that I was going to cut the bottom off, scoop the nougat or whatever out, and put the ring in the chocolate so that she would bite into the chocolate and there'd be a ring there. That was how it worked. So I gave her, on the way to lunch, I gave her the box of chocolates as an early Christmas present. And she picked one of the smaller ones and took a bite of it and put it back in. And I said, didn't care for that one. And she said, yeah, not really. And I said, I started thinking she's going to go to the office and say, anybody else want some chocolates?
Oh, no.
So I thought, well, don't throw them away or just hand the rest of them out. And that made her suspicious. And she said, why is that? And I said, well, pick that one right there. And so that's when she found the ring. And she said, what does this ring mean? And I said, well, if you put it on your finger, it means we're engaged. And she said, but I don't remember you asking me anything. And so we had this. So it was in the parking lot of Big Al's Submarine Sandwiches, which is at 21st and Harvard in Tulsa, that I got out of the car and went around to the other side of the car and got down on one knee in the parking lot and said, that ring means, will you marry me? And she said, yes. And that was our engagement story.
That's awesome. I love it. I'm glad you went around the car and got down on your knee, because if you hadn't, I would have said you owe her.
Me. Right? Exactly.
I'm trying to do the math in my head. So you've been married 43
years.
43
yeah, we're coming
years.
up on 44 this year. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That is so incredible. I love hearing of successful marriages. And, my husband and I, we're going on 28 years of marriage.
Way to go.
And, praise God. And I've shared a little bit of our testimony before, and it is truly only by the grace of God that we have made it this far. It's by the grace of God that we made it through the first, probably year or 2 of our marriage, because we were both incredibly immature, both in our relationship with the Lord, but also just as humans. We had just turned 20, and we just had a lot of growing up to do. We were very selfish, and still are in a lot of ways, of course, because we're human. But marriage is so hard sometimes. And, I look at marriages around us that just surround us everywhere we go, and my heart aches for couples. And, I don't think it's any different in the homeschool world than it is in the public school world or private school world. Marriage is marriage is marriage. And every phase of life brings a different kind of trial, I think, and, different pressures of life. I feel like the ages of our kids bring different pressures into a marriage, and whatever our circumstances are, maybe there's the loss of a job, a sickness. There's so many things that can affect how our marriage is, and whether it's good or bad. And we go through seasons that are hard and happy. And so I really want to just bring some encouragement to our guests this week, because I'm certain that many who are listening are in a difficult phase of marriage, and maybe they have been in a difficult phase and they're in a really strong, good, happy phase of their marriage right now. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to fall into that hard phase again, because I think that most of us do that. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We want to thank all of our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, Apologia, and IEW. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies, and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Bob Lepine. And the first thing I want to ask is, because you have spent so many years talking with people about marriage, you've spent many years as a pastor, so I know that you've done a lot of counseling. What have you found to be the most difficult part of marriage that most people face?
Well, if you're sitting down with folks in marriage counseling and you ask them what are the challenges that are going on in your marriage, you'll often get responses like communication is an issue. We don't agree on the kids, money issues. There can be in-law issues. All of those will come up. I think of those, Yvette, as presenting issues or symptoms of the deeper issue that is most often what's at play in a marriage. You touched on it when you were talking about your story with Garrett. The challenge for most of our marriages is that we're selfish people married to selfish people.
Yeah.
Both of us have this innate selfishness that we bring to the relationship and say, I know the right way for this to be done. I know the way that would be right and pleasing to me. And if you would just conform to my wishes, we'd all be happy. And that's where the clash often comes in. I've said to couples for years, if we could probably solve 85% of the marriage issues in most marriages today, if couples would apply one Bible verse in their marriage, and that's Philippians 2:3, which says, do nothing from selfishness. And by the way, the Greek word for nothing there means nothing.
Yeah.
do nothing from selfishness or conceit, empty conceit, but with humility, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. It goes on to say, don't just look out for your own interests, but look out for the interests of others. And most of the time in a marriage, somebody has gotten so fixated on it has to be done my way. My way is right. I think I know what's true. This is my preference. If you don't yield to my preference, we get locked up because things aren't going the way we think they should go. And we don't stop and ask the question, what way does God want this to go? Mm-hmm. What would please God when it comes to marriage? We're just thinking, what would please me when it comes to marriage? Now, it has to be both people in a marriage who are committed to this idea of being other-centered, being God-centered first, then being other-centered in a marriage. All it takes is one person who is committed to their selfishness for there to be disruption in a marriage relationship. But I have found, in my own experience, I have a much better eye for identifying selfishness in Marianne than identifying it myself. I see it more clearly in her than I see it in me. And I shouldn't be surprised. Jesus said, you're good at seeing specks in somebody else's eye, and you can't see the log in your own eye. And so I think for most of us, we have to pull back and ask the question, where am I most dug in? Where am I most committed to it has to be done my way? And is that because it's what God says, or is it because that's my preference? Most of us think, well, if it's my preference, I'm sure it's God's preference too. And we're committed to things. I'll just say this, Marianne and I have learned over the years, this thing that we've said to one another, different isn't always wrong. Sometimes it's just different.
Yeah.
And Marianne is quick to say, sometimes it's wrong. And she's right. Mm-hmm. But if we go to Baskin Robbins and I say, I would like Rocky Road, and she says, who would ever eat Rocky Road? Why would you want nuts in your ice cream or marshmallows? Who wants marshmallows in their ice cream? What she's saying is, that's not my preference, but that doesn't mean Rocky Road is wrong. Right. So we have to learn how to let preferences go and just be generous with our preferences. And let's get dug in on the things that matter to God and let go of the things that are just preferences on our part.
You are absolutely spot on. And that's one thing, that I think I've realized in our marriage is that oftentimes we just have differing opinions on things. But the other thing that I see sometimes is that, like, I'm so certain, and it's not necessarily a pride issue or a selfishness issue. It's just that I'm certain I'm right about something, and he's certain he's right about something. And that I think is really hard to reconcile with each other, because I don't even know how to explain that. We both are just certain that our side is right. And so how do you, when you come to this, road where this impasse, how do you deal with that? Because that, I think, at least for us, can sometimes lead to disagreements where I'm like,
Yeah.
but I know you think you're right, but I know I'm right, but I know you think you're right, and I desperately want to work it out, and he desperately wants to work it out, and we always do, I mean, God's good to always work things through with us. But that's so hard when I'm just like, but you don't understand. I just want you to understand what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling about this.
So I think what you've identified, and I think all of us have been through this. I'll give you a real simple example of how this works out. And this will be trivial, but it illustrates a bigger point. We were driving home from church one day, and we had for many Sundays gone in separate cars because I had to go earlier for church stuff. And this day we happened to be in the same car. And so we got to a stoplight, and Marianne said, aren't you going to turn right here? And I said, no, I'm going to go straight. And she said, but if you turn right, you miss the stoplights. And I said, if you turn right, you go a mile farther than if you go this way. And she goes, but you don't have the stoplights to deal with. And by this time my light had turned green and we went straight. And she's just shaking her head like, this is the wrong way to go home, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, no, I can show you on the map that I just saved a mile's worth of gas and we got through the stoplights just fine. Well, okay, so what's going on there on something simple and trivial like that is we have our patterns and our routines, and we do them because they make sense to us. When somebody challenges that, they're really challenging deeply held things. I mean, we've always done it this way, and it just seems right to us. Yeah. And we may even have reasons why, like Marianne's reason, I want to go right because I don't want the stoplights. And I'm thinking, well, I want to go straight because I don't want to go as far in the car. So we were valuing different priorities there. That doesn't mean my priority is right, hers is wrong. It just means we value different things. And most of the time, when you examine those times when you go, I'm right, no, I'm right, you really just have different priorities, different values, things that matter more to you than to somebody else. And that's where we have to pull back and go, are these at a conviction level or are they at a preference level? Is this just something that I prefer to not to miss the stoplights, even if I have to go a little farther? I prefer, Marianne and I have talked about personality differences. She tends to be very structured, planned out. I tend to be more spontaneous. Now, which of those is the right way to be? Well, in some circumstances, you need to be spontaneous. In other circumstances, you need to be planned out. She tends to default in one direction and feels most comfortable in that. I default in another direction, feel most comfortable. We've had to learn, how do we honor the other person and who God made them to be? How do we benefit in our marriage from each other's differences without being irritated by the fact that you don't think like me or act like me or see everything exactly the way I see it? Now, with all of that said, we have to come back and say, when we're talking about things where God has been clear in his word about what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's not true, that's where we want to have common convictions and say, we're both going to bow to what God says, no matter what our preferences are in this situation. Yeah. So a husband who says, well, I think it would spice up our marriage if we watched this movie before we went to bed. And a wife goes, we can't do that because the Bible says that there'd be a lust issue going on. You know, there are biblical convictions there. That's not just a preference issue. And that's at a whole different level than just what are our preferences in marriage. Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff. However, the most important question now is, do you really think Rocky Road is the best ice cream at Baskin-Robbins? No, I really like chocolate peanut butter better than that. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say chocolate chip because chocolate chip is clearly the right answer. You and Marianne can go to Baskin-Robbins together. Does she like chocolate chip too? She does like chocolate chip, yes. She likes Brahms chocolate chip. Yeah, you know, Brahms chocolate chip is close to Baskin-Robbins. And it's like probably a fifth of the cost. Exactly. But it's not quite the same. So yeah, no. It's a good thing I don't live in driving distance of a Brahms. I'd be in trouble. Oh gosh. Oh, we live in driving distance of like 10 of them. I know. It's ridiculous. So yes, they're everywhere, but I'm not a huge ice cream person. So yeah, chocolate chip ice cream with marshmallow cream, rainbow sprinkles, and a cherry on top. That is my favorite ice cream sundae since I was about
5 years old, probably. We used to have a Baskin-Robbins that was right around the corner from our house, and my dad and I would ride our bikes there. And I've tried like grown-up ice cream, like chocolate or Rocky Road.
Can't go
it's
there.
It's just not good. No, I go back to my 5-year-old chocolate chip ice cream. So anyway, I love it. But we're out of time. We will be back on Wednesday. We're going to keep talking about marriage and bringing this encouragement to you. Where can people find out more about you, Bob?
Probably the best thing is go to our website for the church. That's Redeemer LR for Little Rock, redeemerlr.org.
Sounds great. We'll put that link in the show notes. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you back here on Wednesday. Bye.
Education is discipleship, and this is something I didn't understand until I was probably 3 years into homeschooling. The Bible teaches us in Luke 6:40 that when a student is fully trained, he will be like his teacher. And as we look around the culture right now, I think it begs the question, who is teaching our children? Who is teaching our children, and what are they teaching our children? And to me, the primary benefit of having my children home with me is I am able to impart my worldview to my children.